For those who may not know my face, I think my name is there. I'm Patricia Alexander, and I would say I'm a long time friend of Steve Graham. And it's always been an honor for me anytime I have the opportunity to precede him, in this case, to introduce a person I regard as one of the top scholars in the world, but also one of the most amazing people I've ever known in my life. So I'm going to take a few minutes to do the perfunctory sort of introduction that people usually give when such scholars take the stage. And then I'm going to share a few little of my personal insights about Steve. I should say that as you see there, Steve has been working in this area of reading research for 42 years and some days and minutes. But that means, of course, he started when he was 12. And has been so prolific since that time. He has published over 300 articles of all sorts. And I think you've had up to 30 plus funded projects. And I think what's very, very important is to understand that also a lot of Steve's work is instructional intervention. It takes place in that messy, chaotic place we call the classrooms or in schools. And what Steve's work has done is to change the face of what we know about writing, simply put. He is one of the, if not the leading scholar in writing development. I see people like Gert is also online with us, and all of us who appreciate the quality of this research has been foundational to all of us, Steve, and for that we are grateful. But writing is not the only thing that Steve has made his name for. Of course, with this amazing scholar and friend Karen Harris, he's also carved out an amazing, effective strategy, instructional strategy, self-regulated strategy. Is it development? Am I close? Model. I always remember the acronym. I don't ever think about the name. That has been proven effective under so many different contexts and situations. I can't imagine anyone more deserving, Steve, than you for being named Thorndike winner last year. But I want to now just say, before I turn it over to Steve, a few of my personal insights about Steve Graham. I said he's probably one of the top scholars in the world on writing, but I shall also say that probably that's because he's one of the most competitive people I've ever known in my life. We were co-editing a journal. I think we did it for almost 2 years, Contemporary and Psych. And we used to have battles daily on who could get their review letters out the fastest. I think, Steve, you may have beat me, but it was only by fractions. That's all I can say. I remember Steve's unusual behaviors. He actually, instead of going to lunch, he would pick up basketball at lunchtime. And he was known inevitably for black high-top Converse sneakers. Is that right, Steve? Do you still wear them? Do you have them on now?
Years ago.
Oh, yeah, I keep looking for them. And I was going to send you a whole suitcase full at one point in time. But as I said to you, I think the thing to know about Steve beyond all those is he is one of the most dedicated scholars that I know. He is also one of the kindest, most caring individuals I've known. And he has been a mentor, not just to amazing students all around the country and the world, but he is a mentor to even people who are in age, maybe his senior, if not in his skill, myself included. He's a person that always has time and concern for what it is that you need from him. And so, Steve, with all due respect and pride and being able to introduce you, I turn the floor, the internet, the computer over to you.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was very nice. I could probably quit now and it'll never get any better than that. Thank you so much. I want to start by saying how pleased I am and how pleased I was when I found out that I'd won the Thorndike Award. Karen and I were in Toronto last year at AERA, and Clark Chin had sent an email towards the end saying that I had won, and I felt like I was dancing on the moon, to be honest. You know, the company that you share this with are people like Pat, who introduced me, my dear friend, Joanna Williams, who won last year. Really, in some ways, one of my mentors, Michael Presley, and also one of my wife's mentors, Karen Harris. Michael was also a winner and was very influential for both Karen and I. And, you know, it also puts you in company, even if it's not really deserved, with people like Skinner and Piaget and Bloom, etc. So this is the pinnacle of my career for me. So I'm so pleased. I have two goals for today. One is to provide an overview of four major themes in my research program. And when I say my, and I'll come back to this later, it's never my, it's always work done with other people. You know, anything like this belongs to a whole bunch of us, not to a single person. I'd also like to make this presentation a little bit more personal by sharing some themes from my own life that continue to echo in my scholarship. My personal feeling is that it's good to kind of see the person behind the work. And so I hope to kind of illustrate how I got in some ways to where I am in terms of the work and writing that myself and my colleagues have done. And for lack of a better way to use a mnemonic for this, I'm going to go with the 5 Ps, which you'll see me trying to hold up here. But the first one basically of these 5 Ps involves progress. And you'll see in parentheses there, science and detection. When I was 13 years old, I was in a school library in Phoenix. I lived there for 9 weeks at the time with my grandmother before we were getting ready to go overseas to France. My father was in the military, and so he would go set up. We would go live with my grandmother. And I moved a lot as a kid, sometimes 3 times in a year. And so I wasn't a reader, didn't really care for it, wasn't much on school either. But I picked up a book in the library. I'm sure it's probably one of the worst written books that's ever hit science fiction, but it was about explorers on Mars. And I was captivated and I was hooked. And from that point on, I've been a science fiction aficionado. And in 1963, when I was 13, there were 2 basic themes in science fiction. One is science progress, that we build a better world and a better place through science. And the other was the concerns that science could potentially result in all of our destruction. I happen to take the former, and ever since, I've been very interested in terms of how science can help us build a better world. And in part of that, I become particularly interested in mysteries, and so that kind of fits with my interest in science and detection. Now, obviously, progress doesn't go much of anywhere without purpose. And so in my case, I mentioned earlier, I wasn't much of a student. In fact, I was hell on wheels in the first 4 years. I would have been classified as ADHD if such a term existed at the time when I was 6 and 7 years of age. And, you know, it so happened that when I was 22, I was kind of at a loggerheads about what to do. I had graduated from a small college in Georgia, had spent 6 months hitchhiking across the country and back and up and down and everywhere in between, and then spent about a year as a repairman. And I knew that I couldn't continue as a repairman for the rest of my life. I was bored stiff. Not that there's anything wrong with being a repairman. I learned quite a bit, and it's a very important job. And I went into the college where I had done my undergraduate degree, and I said to them, you know, I used to have difficulty with school when I was a kid. And I think I'd like to work with kids who find school challenging. And so in a sense, the progress that I see, the purpose that it's tied to, is kind of hooked to Charlie Brown here, the end point of a cartoon. Some days I feel like I'm riding uphill. Initially, my interest was in writing, but it shifted. Initially my interest was in reading, but it shifted to writing. And I've stuck there for those 42 years ever since. Progress and purpose needs passion. And I have to be honest, there are times that I can't believe that people pay me to do what I do. It's what I love most. I can't think of doing anything else. Now, when you talk about passion, you can have it, but you need energy and perseverance to help you accomplish, that progress and purpose that I mentioned before. And in my particular case, the high energy activity level that I had as a young child, and it caused everybody a whole lot of grief until I was about 10 or 11 years of age, that energy has been the strongest point in terms of my academic career, because it means that I can really bring a lot to bear in terms of focusing in on what I want to do and persevering at it. So it's been a great asset, even though initially it wasn't much of an asset and more of a hindrance than anything else. The fourth P for me is poise. I grew up in a military family that's all about external control, but at the same time, you're expected to have a lot of self-control. And for those of you who know anything about ADHD, it's not just an issue about attention and your level of activity, but it's an issue about self-regulation and self-control. And so as a kid, I would do things, say things, and then finally my mind would catch up with me and I'd say, oh my God, what did I do? And so it took me a little longer than a lot of kids to develop that self-control or poise. And I think, in terms of thinking about that, it's always about, in terms of poise, growth. And so I want to illustrate one thing with you very briefly that will start moving us into a little bit of the research program myself and my colleagues have conducted over the years. I initially started off as a behaviorist. I was a special education teacher at the small college in Georgia. The person who was my mentor, Lemoyne Miller, he came out of the University of Kansas, which was very well known as a behavioral hotspot. With the advent of the cognitive revolution in writing, Flower and Hayes, Scartamaglia and Bereiter, my attention and focus shifted to cognitive aspects of writing. In recent years, I've taken another shift, which is, you can think of as a cognitive, social, contextual approach, and I've developed a model called the Writers Within Community model of writing that brings together both dimensions of the social, cultural, etc. aspects of writing and the cognitive aspects. And it's based on the premise, pretty straightforward and simple, that writing is both enhanced and bound by what the individual brings to the task, but it's also at the same time supported and bound by the context and within which it occurs, and that those interact together. And so just really briefly, what that model looks like, at least in terms of two of the components, not all of its interactions, because I don't have the time to discuss that today. You can see on the cognitive end, we have control mechanisms, executive control, self-regulation, no surprise, long-term memory resources like knowledge, beliefs, and, which would include motivational beliefs, production processes in writing, and then modulators, which include emotions, mediators such as personality traits and physical states. And within a writing community, each individual, whether it's teacher, mentor, students, writer, reader, whatever, they bring these kinds of resources and cognitive structure to the task. And that sets within a very complex set of contextual things. So in the middle, you have, say, a single context, which has particular writing goals, uses certain tools and actions to create written products that are, part of the purpose of the community. And then those things are influenced by writers and collaborators, purposes of communities, the physical and social, and then it keeps going on and on from that point on. But the reason I wanted to share this is I once heard somebody say, and I greatly believe this, that you're not a scholar if you can't change your point of view multiple times throughout your career. So I wanted to share, at least in my context, what that meant going from being a behaviorist to a cognitivist, to somebody who tries to incorporate in both social, cultural, and the cognitive aspects of writing or thinking or learning or however you want to put this. Okay, my last P. You know, as I said before, any award is not about a single person. It's about a host of people. And I kind of illustrate this here in two ways. You know, you have a lot of people who are minions, and it's not meant to be that anybody's my minion, but everybody's kind of excited and they're working together or viewing something together. They collaborate. And in my particular case, I've been lucky enough to collaborate with people from around the world. I have colleagues in Australia, Clarence Nigg, who I work carefully with. I work with folks in Chile and South America, Gerardo, and I work with a lot of different people in Europe. I have colleagues in the greater Asia region that I work with. The only two continents that I'm not involved in terms of work right now is Africa and Antarctica, and I'm sometimes fond of saying, if penguins ever learn to write, I will be there. But the point of this is that it's not a single endeavor. It's a multiple endeavor of many people, and I'm very thankful to all of them, colleagues, collaborators, former students, and students currently. I want to pay particular attention to my most constant and the smarter of us, of our colleague team, and that's Karen. And that's when we were first getting started. So I think this is probably about 1980s. We were both at Auburn at the time. So thank you very much, Karen. In terms of the research that I'd like to share with you, you have to narrow it down to what your themes are going to be. So I was a history major at one time. And the great thing about being a historian or thinking like a historian is that in some ways the last person standing gets to write the history. So in this case, I get to write the history. I'd love to say that these things all occurred in this particular order, but it's recursive, it's a mismatch. But if I was a qualitative researcher and pulling out themes, these would be four of the major themes of the research that I've been doing. And the first involves making the case, an empirical case, for why writing is important. And this was not an initial focal point in my career. The focal point of my career initially was with Karen Harris in terms of the work that we were doing with kids with special needs in terms of trying to figure out what was going on in terms of writing and developing a better mousetrap, so to speak. But in 2007, in January, I got a call from Dolores Perrin, who asked if I would be interested in working with her on a report for the Carnegie Corporation. And, you know, I was no fool. I saw this as a really good opportunity. And we put a proposal together that got rejected. She thought they wanted something like Reading Next, which was in a sense an interview with 5 experts in the area of reading. And what they really wanted was a meta-analysis. And so we did a meta-analysis for them that was subsequently named Writing Next. And in speaking with Andreas Enriquez, who was heading this, the Carnegie Corporation in New York at the time, this particular project, what they really wanted to do was to be able to say to policymakers is, yes, we do know how to teach writing. Now, obviously, we did know how to teach writing, but the coin of the day, so to speak, was being able to show through empirical research, true experiments and quasi-experiments, that there were effective procedures. And so we created this meta-analysis, which was later published in Journal of Educational Psychology, with that in mind. And I think we identified about 11 techniques that were effective in terms of improving overall writing quality. Now, in some ways at this time, I felt this was kind of a silly endeavor because, you know, think of all the things that we use writing for. Persuade others, learn new ideas, record information, create imaginary worlds, express feelings, entertain others, heal psychological and physiological wounds, chronicle experiences, and explore the meaning of life, so to speak. So it seems to me, on the face of it, writing is important in its own right. Now, I realized about 2 years after Writing Next had come out. I think it had something like 2 million downloads. And so, you know, you're happy about that. But if you'd have said, did you change the landscape? Did this report make a difference? I would have said, not like we would have hoped. You know, I heard from people in different countries that it was used as a way for them to think about their national policies, etc. But I did not see much change in the way that writing was talked about or handled here at home in the US. So I talked to Andreas Henriques again, and I said, you know, maybe the tack we ought to take is tie our wagon to reading, because reading and math and science are viewed as extremely important by the public and by policymakers. And as a result, he said yes. One of my students and I, Michael Hebert, who's at the University of Nebraska now, did a meta-analysis taking a look at the effects of writing and writing instruction on reading. And it shouldn't come really as a surprise that when kids write about what they read, then they understand it better. And you can see the effect sizes here for both norm reference and research design comprehension tests. Also, when you increase how much students write, there's a positive effect on their comprehension of material and norm reference tests. And then when you teach various aspects of writing, there's a carryover effect. And you can see these here. You know, the bottom one's a separate meta-analysis, but when you teach something like spelling, word reading gets better, reading comprehension gets better. And so there's a lot of evidence that was floating around, not tied together, but when you put it together, it supports many of the kinds of theories that have been developed about reading and writing connections. Shared knowledge theory, for one, you know, kind of the functional theory and the rhetorical relations theory. And so that was part of our onslaught in terms of trying to make this more prominent in policymaker eyes and the public, the public in general. I will mention one other thing here that's not on a slide. We also did a third report on informing writing, which was basically about assessment in writing. And, you know, we had to part ways a little bit with Carnegie on this. Basically, we found that formative assessment made a difference, but we did not find that summative assessments really were doing what many policymakers thought they were doing or should be doing. But coming off of this Writing Helps Reading, just recently we published another meta-analysis and review of educational research, and guess what? Reading instruction makes you a better writer. So it's reciprocal, it goes both ways. And you can see the kinds of things here. When you teach phonological awareness, you get better at spelling. When you teach phonics, you get better at spelling. When you teach comprehension strategies, you know, writing quality tends to get better. When you increase how much kids read, writing quality gets better. And then when you observe readers as they interact with text, and I'm going to give a shout out to my colleague Gert Rajalzerdam here, because he and his students really got this work going, you get a very strong effect on writing quality. And when you read and analyze other people's texts, you get a moderate effect on writing quality. And then finally, in terms of this reading and writing connection work and trying to make this more prominent, we also took a look at what happens when you combine reading and writing instruction together equally, you know, 40–60% if you'd like. This was recently published in Review of Education Research, and you can look at the statistics there. When you teach the two combined, reading comprehension and writing quality gets better, decoding and mechanics get better, reading vocabulary gets better, and writing output gets better. Now that doesn't mean it always gets better, and of course that would be the case in the other meta-analysis that we've done. Whole language programs, reading got better, but writing did not. And cooperative learning programs, AKA Bob Slavin, reading got better, but writing didn't. And I'll tell you, the whole language programs in writing and cooperative learning looked a lot alike. They were fairly weak on any kind of instruction that was going on for kids. So it was more, you know, write and let's see if you get better, without a whole lot of focus in terms of helping kids acquire the skills they need to be better writers. Finally, just published this year, and this will be the last point that I want to make, is that another way of tying our wagon to other kinds of movements to make writing more prominent is we recreated and expanded and extended Robert Bangert-Grounds and his colleagues' meta-analysis on Writing to Learn, which was published in 2004. And we got even better outcomes than he did, with about a third of a standard deviation improvement in science, social studies, and math. And this was a very constant effect. It cut across the different types of writing activities. It cut across grade, cut across content area, the types of measures that were used, and the assessment procedures that were used. So I think one of the things that I'm very proud that my colleagues and I have been able to do is we hope that we've been able to change some minds about why writing is important and why it needs to be a central element of the school curriculum. Writing not only helps you, and writing instruction not only helps you become a better writer, it helps you become a better reader, and it helps you become a better learner as well. It needs to be integral to what happens in schools. So that brings me to the second theme that I'd like to share with you. So if I'm making the case that writing's important, I think it's important also to take a look at how writing is taught. And so starting in about 2002, as I was starting to move from mostly focusing on students with special needs to thinking about students with special needs being in regular classrooms and thinking more broadly about writing research with all kids, we started conducting surveys, national surveys in the US with teachers to get a handle on what they're doing. And we had a very common set of themes in this. Random samples of teachers. We had data on whether, where we could look to see if the responders and non-responders differed. We could calculate confidence intervals in terms of our results. And we conducted these surveys usually in 3 grade intervals, 1st to 3rd, 4th to 6th, and so on. And we looked at a variety of things, including how much time was spent teaching writing, how much time students spent writing, the types of writing they did, the types of instructional practices were applied. Specifically, we looked at evidence-based practices, the types of adaptations that were made with kids. In addition, in more recent years, we've expanded this with the same kinds of methodologies to the greater China region, Chile, and I'll say Norway. And kind of the end point of this is at this point, you could think of this as we've interviewed about 8,000 teachers through these surveys. Also, we're starting to do observational studies in the US and in Chile as well. And the US, I'm doing work with Steve Coolio and Allison Collins, and we're looking at writing instruction as delivered for kids who have special needs in 4th to 6th grade. I'm not going to say anything about that per se, because we're still in the progress, and same thing in Chile, but I do want to say what our major findings are. So one, it appears, and with surveys work, you have to take in account that people might inflate a little bit because they want to tell you that they're doing a good job. But it does appear that there is a minority of teachers, both in the US and elsewhere, really that are doing a phenomenal job of teaching writing. They've got a lot going on. And they seem to have a very well-connected and coherent program. However, what we find in general, and this is the US and pretty much across the world with other people's work as well, very little time is devoted to teaching writing, and very little time is spent on students writing. Now, the odd thing about this is teachers apply a lot of different practices, including evidence-based practices for writing instruction, but they're not applied very frequently. I think a particularly interesting aspect of the work that we've been doing here is we've been taking a look at beliefs that are correlates, that we think might be correlates of how much teachers engage in particular practices. And I can tell you the 2 most powerful. Teacher efficacy, teachers who feel more efficacious about teaching writing their students spend more time writing and get more writing instruction, and also preparation to teach writing consistently across studies, both in the US and across the world, in both observational studies and survey studies. Both of these come up as powerful predictors. But we've also found that teachers who have a more positive attitudes towards teaching writing are more likely to engage their students in writing and writing instruction. And epistemological beliefs in the more traditional sense, about knowing, etc., also predict, how much instruction is provided. Surprisingly, teachers' beliefs about their own writing are very poor predictors, which, I think deserves more exploration. The third area, and I would say this has constituted a large portion of our empirical work, is taking a look at catalysts for writing development. So when Karen and I first met, I think this was probably 1978, 1979, she was interested in cognitive behavior modification, and I was interested in writing, and we looked for a way to bring the two together. We'd both been teachers, and one of the things, I want to acknowledge, one of the most important things, other than obtaining a lifelong partner and wife, that came out of this was Karen's development of self-regulated strategy development. And, kind of the initial thinking was, both for us thinking about our teaching experience, is that a lot of the kids that we were working with didn't have a lot of knowledge about writing. It was not very deep, and it was not well organized. And, these were kids who have difficulty in school, so they weren't that motivated, and they were not strategic about how they went about the writing process. And so in our first study, Karen designed SRSD, and I designed a writing strategy that went with it. And, I think there's probably close to 100, 150 studies now that look at SRSD. Now, at the time, we didn't really have a theory to draw upon, other than our practical experience. But we met Pat Alexander, who introduced me, and she had developed this beautiful model of domain learning, which basically, viewed learning as setting within a domain, which fit well for us because we're working on writing. And the catalysts for that were motivation, strategic prowess, and knowledge. So obviously we were drawn to that. Now, we did some modification on it. We added writing skills because a lot of the kids we worked with had a lot of difficulty with sentence construction, handwriting, and spelling. And we took some liberties with the motivation aspects of it as well. We were less interested in interest, so to speak, than we were maybe with self-efficacy and attitudes. And we posed 3 different questions, each of these 4 things, skills, knowledge, strategies, and motivation. We figured that these were important contributors to writing development if we could say yes to each of these 3 questions in terms of research. And so one was, do more advanced writers possess more of X than less advanced writers? And I'll give an illustration of each of these in a second. Do individual differences in X, say writing skills, predict individual differences in writing performance? Does teaching X, the strategies, result or improve in students' writing? So I want to share 3 studies real quickly with you that kind of give an example. And I'm going to go to an older study first, and then go to more recent studies to illustrate the last 2. So are more advanced writers more knowledgeable than less advanced writers? This was a study that I did with Charles MacArthur. And Skip and I, Skip had a center when I was at the University of Maryland, and he and I did some work there and have continued to work throughout both of our lives together. And so he's been an incredible collaborator to the work that we've done, and also an incredible contributor to writing research in general. So the question that we ask in this study is there differences in kids' knowledge? So the way that we got at knowledge is we posed a number of questions. We gave a scenario that kind of like is a different kid, and you had to tell them something about writing. And we had 39 kids who were in 4th, 5th, 7th, and 8th grade who were struggling writers, kids with learning disabilities, and 29 typically developing writers. And so I want to just kind of illustrate some of the responses on this, and it'll give you, and I'm giving you, I'm giving you kind of the far ends of each of these responses. But when we asked the kids who were better writers or more skilled writers, what do good writers do? They would say things like they read it over and see if they have everything they want. Think of very creative ideas. Make the ending real exciting. Put my sentences in different order. So, you know, these are things that you would hope that kids are going to be saying. When we ask the kids who were not as strong of writers, these are the kinds of things that they use whatever paper the teacher tells them. They get plenty of sleep. They make sure I have my date and name on there. And my favorite of all times, I write it bigger so that it takes up more space. Now, the point that I'd like to make here is that when we ask the stronger writers about writing, 2/3 of their comments were on substance and process, 1/3 on product or mechanics. It was just the opposite when we asked kids who were not as strong of writers about this. And so one of the things that we realized is that they viewed writing differently. They didn't see it in the same way. What we expect for skilled writing is substance and process with much less emphasis on mechanics. And remember, some of these kids were in 7th grade. Maybe younger kids, we'd expect more of that. So the second example I'd like to share with you is the individual differences kind of question that we posed. And this is a study that Karen and I did with Kei Wuchakumar, who we have several grants with and is a very good friend and great researcher at Texas A&M. And this was part of a project looking at using SRSD, the work that Kay and Bonnie Myers have done together in terms of text structure and reading and bringing it together. And then the work Kay has done in terms of developing a smart, I always am a little leery of saying this, but an intelligent tutoring system. And the reason I'm a little leery about that is because these things can only be so intelligent at this point. But what we did in this is we tested out that domain model of PATS that I was talking about earlier. And we actually have a couple of different versions of these studies in different places. This one was published in the Elementary School Journal. And so what we did is first of the year, we measured students' handwriting and spelling skills. We measured their self-efficacy and attitudes. We took a look at their plans and created a metric for scoring them. And we looked at their approach for writing and different things. And then we looked at their knowledge, topic and genre knowledge for the most part, and some structural elements in terms of knowledge, in terms of writing. And basically, here's what we did. We wanted to know, when you put all these together, along with reading and gender, how much variance did you account for? Okay, so that's the first model, the full model. What happens when you pull out skills like handwriting and spelling? Is there a difference between the models in terms of how much quality of writing scores are accounted for? So we did that with each one. We tested it. We pulled out skills. We pulled out motivation. We pulled out strategic writing. We pulled out knowledge. Not in order like that, but we pulled each out from the model and said, what happens? And so what we found is that each of these 4 attributes or catalysts, if you'd like, each counted for unique variance in writing quality after controlling for all of the other variables. So skills accounted for unique variance after controlling for motivation, strategic writing, and knowledge, and vice versa, including, the interclass correlations, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides that share that information and come to the third study. So that third premise that we put forward is that, if something's important, then if you teach it, it ought to have an effect on writing. And we weren't interested in the effect on the particular skill you're teaching, but a more general effect in terms of writing quality, so that it not only makes that skill better, but improves the overall system as well. And so this is a 2012 study that was published in the Journal of Teacher Education that Karen led on. And the reason I wanted to share this one with you is it illustrates 2 points that I think are important. One is that this is a study where half of the kids got SRSD instruction, self-regulated strategy development instruction for persuasive writing, and then the control group, if you'd like, or the other half of the kids got it for story writing. Now, the reason that that works is because these two genres are constructed in not in the same way. You know, the basic genre elements of each are different. What constitutes a story is not the same thing as constitutes a persuasive or opinion piece of writing. And so we had seen in other studies that there was very little carryover from one to the other, which is an important point to make in terms of writing. It is not a single thing, but multiple things. And we have to attend to multiple things if we want kids to be better writers. The other thing I like about this is everybody got something that should help them in this particular case. And so, you know, I'm not going to go through the statistical analysis. It's going to be what you think, HLM, et cetera. But here's what we got in terms of effects. You'll notice there's a couple of negative effects here, so I'll explain this. So what happened is at the first of the study, everybody wrote a story and a persuasive text. At the end of the study, everybody wrote a story and a persuasive text. During the study, half the kids were taught the story writing strategy, and the other half were taught the persuasive strategy. And so we measured 4 things in all of the stories and all of the persuasive text. Overall quality, the number of genre elements for that particular genre, the number of words written, and the number of transition words. Now, transition words is really not much in line with what you do in story writing, but because we were really focused in on the persuasive condition, and it is so important there, we had it. But you can see the effects. When you did this instruction and you compared, you know, what persuasive instruction versus the story condition, well, you know, if you're in that persuasive condition, your persuasive text had an effect size of 2, elements was 4, words actually went down a little bit. But our take is that that's not something that we were focusing on increasing. And in fact, kids got more efficient in their writing, and transition words had a huge effect. In terms of stories, for the kids in that story condition, the quality of the stories was higher, as were their elements. Words, not much there. And of course, transition words didn't get us anything. Now, I mentioned these, you know, 4 factors, but I want to be clear, there's a lot of other things going on in writing. And, you know, I can't address all those today, but I just want to share really briefly with you. When you take a look at kids, these are from different meta-analysis that we've done, kids with learning disabilities, ADHD, speech and hearing, or poor readers, all of these kids, quality of their writing, when compared to the same age kids that don't have special needs, their writing is much lower. And you can bet that, you know, speech and hearing problems interfere with writing. Attention and other kinds of problems, impulsivity, et cetera, interfere with writing, and reading interferes with writing. Now, the 4th thing that I'd like to share, and this has consumed a lot of my life recently, and a lot of different colleagues that I've worked on this with, is that we've tried very hard to identify evidence-based practices. Now, the typical way that that occurs is we've done meta-analysis with true and quasi-experiments to see, you know, what the effects of different writing interventions are. But what I don't want to get lost in this, and I'm not going to talk about today, we've also looked at single participant research, computed effect sizes for that, and it's very consistent with what we found on the group studies. And we've done meta-synthesis of qualitative studies of exceptional teachers to see what they do. And this stuff lines up really well. When you teach kids to be strategic, you teach them strategies for planning, revising, editing, drafting, strong effect in terms of overall quality of writing. When you increase their knowledge of writing or their genre knowledge of writing or the vocabulary, you get a positive effect. Not a lot of studies on writing motivation, but when you work to enhance motivation, writing quality improves. When you teach writing skills for younger students, these are mostly 1st to 3rd grade, not only do these skills get better, but these effect sizes, moderate effect sizes in terms of improving writing quality. So I think what you can say here is that these writing skills interfere with other writing processes until they become more automatic and mastered. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that we found as well, and you can see these things here. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but you can see we have a lot of different things at our beck and call to help kids become better writers. Now, what does this all mean in a sense? You know, at the end of the day, as you move closer to the end of your career, you have to think about, you know, what did I learn here? What does it mean in the sense of where I started? And the point where I started was as a teacher. And so that was a driving force for me. You know, I wanted to learn how to teach better. I wanted to be a better teacher in the classroom to the kids that I was working with. And so what I can say at the end of the day is we've learned a lot about how to teach writing. Excuse me, it went forward on its own somehow. But the teacher I once was would have said, we have not fulfilled our part of the bargain, that we have not made as big a difference in the classroom as we should. So I want to end with this last slide. And I think there's a number of things here. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I'd like to leave a couple of minutes for questions. And we're going to end at 55 after. But one of the reasons why we haven't made the difference is writing isn't a public priority. Take a look at reading and all the work that has gone on to make reading a public priority. Writing needs its own Marshall Plan if we're going to move forward. We need to make sure that school administrators and educational policymakers are informed about why writing is so important. I think we need to reimagine how schools provide and envision writing instruction. There's not much going on there, unfortunately, at least from what teachers tell us. We need to provide adequate time. I think this is one of our biggest problems. Not enough time is devoted. And we need to make sure that teachers are adequately prepared and can continue to improve their skills as writing teachers. And I got to tell you, in the surveys that we do, for those of us in academia, they're very critical of what we do. Even English teachers, 72% say that their preparation at the university was inadequate. We need to expand the goals of writing instruction, not to just being a good writer, but being somebody who wants to write. What's the purpose? We want people who are lifelong writers, and we need to do a better job of connecting writing done at school and home. And obviously with the digital changes that are now, you know, in play and are going to continue to be in play, we need to do more in terms of making that part of school instruction as well. So I want to say thank you very much and for taking the time to listen to me. And Wade, we have time. If there's time for a question or two, I think we have a little bit of time left.